TXFM presents Album Anniversaries with Joe Donnelly.
This is Album Anniversaries on TXFM. It's Joe Donnelly here, and today I'm looking at an album that became the biggest record of one band's career, but also came to define an era of music. Not only that, it has aged incredibly well over 20 years. In fact, respect and love for the record seems to have grown as each year passes. What's the Story? Morning Glory was the second album from Oasis, released in 1995. It was produced by a man who has worked with Ash, the Fratellis, The View and the Kaiser Chiefs, to name but a few. He is Owen Morris. Hello, Owen.
Hello, Joe.
How are you doing?
Very well, thank you.
You were very close to the album in producing it, but 20 years on, are you still able to kind of step back and look at it and go, that was quite an achievement?
Yeah, I mean, it was a happy and good time for myself, certainly, but I think for everyone involved. And yeah, it was. We were very proud of it at the time, to be honest, Joe. You know, we all thought we'd done a really good job. So we were kind of bouncing when we finished it, really, before it was released.
You had worked on Definitely Maybe. Was there a sense of having to make a great follow-up, or was it just we're going to do the next Oasis album?
Well, I think Noel definitely had a plan to write songs that had bigger choruses, and a very chorus-driven album was his intention with Morning Glory. So that was his plan. As far as everyone else concerned, I think because of the success of Definitely Maybe, I think it had sold something like 400,000, which was a big Creation album then. I think we were all just worried about not selling less,
okay,
really, and sort of maintaining that success. And
the Britpop thing didn't intrude too much on the objectives in making the album. No, I think whatever the Britpop thing, the Blur fight that was manufactured by Blur and their record company, I think was irrelevant when we were making the record. Really, Noel had his plan of what singles to release. There's some might say before we recorded Morning Glory, and then Roll With It, then Wonderwall, then Don't Look Back in Anger. He'd already decided those were the singles, and that was the game plan for the next year for them. Before any, there was no thought about other bands, I don't think. He seems so single-minded and very focused. When you sat down initially to discuss What's the Story, Morning Glory, did Noel bring ideas or songs that were ready to go?
Yeah, he had odd songs that he'd had knocking around for ages, like Hello and She's Electric. Some might say we demoed in the studio when we were doing Whatever. That was in the summer of '94. And then when we were doing Some Might Say, he played bits of Champagne Supernova, and he had the chorus for Morning Glory. So he had these songs going, but things like Wonderwall, I don't believe he wrote until the week of the session, of the actual recording session. Such as Noel Gallagher's way. Very creative man.
Extremely. We'll get into the songs in specific detail in a moment, but he has described you, Owen, as the only man who understands the Oasis sound.
He's also said some not so kind things as well. We had a great time for a few years there. I was very lucky to meet them and get involved with helping them fix Definitely Maybe. I mean, a lot of people could have done it, to be honest, but I was lucky enough to get the job. And Noel was, even though he knew what he wanted, he wasn't kind of au fait with the studio process. So I just kind of filled in his gaps, really, as far as running the session and recording vocals and, putting arrangements together. There wasn't really a great deal I had to do. Yeah, just filling in his gaps, really. And once he'd learned it all, he didn't need someone like me anymore.
I think you're just being too self-deprecating. You mentioned arrangements. I mean, there's certainly, you mentioned that
he had bigger choruses and they were definitely more anthemic, but also there was orchestration and there were a lot more strings on What's the Story Morning Glory. Was that a challenge that you and him had to kind of get your heads around, or were you in charge of that particular thing?
Well, I'd just recorded a Northern Soul with the Verve, and there was a track on there called History that Richard Ashcroft and myself kind of put together one night, and I played the strings on it. So I always had my computer sort of running and things like that. And Noel liked it, and we'd kind of put the little string section on whatever. And in the studio for Morning Glory, Noel hired in a mellotron with the intention of it being used for strings occasionally. And I just came up with parts as and when they were required. I think the first track we actually put strings on was Wonderwall.
Okay.
Because he wanted a different vibe on it from the usual Oasis trademark Bonehead rhythm guitar and Noel Pilesy guitars.
Yeah.
So I worked out some cello parts. Bonehead and I played them.
And it kind of came together almost organically.
Yeah, it was a very quick recording. That Wonderwall took maybe 7 or 8 hours to record in total.
And I know that some tracks were done live. I think, was it Roll With It was done live, but most were vocal and acoustic, and then to a click, and then overdubs were added.
Yeah, absolutely. Roll With It was the first track we recorded, and that was just setting the band up on the first day in Rockfield. And they did a take just to check sort of levels, and then they did a bunch more takes, and they went and watched a football match on TV, and I had to listen through, and the very first take was their best one, where they couldn't really hear themselves, so we kept that as the backing track for Roll With It. But then I was kind of talking to Noel, and I'd read about how Mark Bolan and Tony Visconti used to make their backing tracks and put their tracks together, which was Mark Bolan playing an acoustic guitar to a click track.
Yeah.
And then they'd overdub the drums and, build the tracks. So we decided to give that a go, and we ended up doing that for every track. And it was just very quick, because Noel would vary. We'd decide on a tempo. Noel would put down a guide of the entire song. And then Noel would sit in the studio with Alan White while Alan White was drumming and just direct him through the song. We'd stop and start. Noel would go, it needs a fill here. And we'd get the drums done in like 20 minutes. And then just move on, put the bass down. Yeah, it was a very, very quick process.
He really was very single-minded. What about choosing a track? Let's take a little musical interlude. Owen, could I impose on you to pick a track from What's the Story Morning Glory? Which one would you like to hear?
Oh, I like Some Might Say. Okay.
Was that was there any particular, was it an easy one to get down, or? No,
it was a bit of a we kind of messed around a bit. It was the last track Tony McCarroll recorded, maybe apart from Acquiesce. And we kind of recorded it, and Noel and I decided that the take we'd recorded and we thought was perfect at the time was a little bit too fast, so we got the band out of bed at like midnight because we were in a residential studio, and they put down another take. Well, next morning it seemed like it was a bit faster again, but it had a good energy, and then Liam was desperate to sing it, and Liam sang it, and the vocals were so brilliant that we just kind of went with it. So it's kind of, it's imperfect, but it's just a brilliant song.
That's what makes it so good.
Yeah.
This is Some Might Say from Oasis. It's album Anniversaries, music from Oasis with Some Might Say. What's the Story Morning Glory is 20 years old, and I'm speaking to the producer Owen Morris. Owen, one of the things just on the tracks, Champagne Supernova was a tricky enough song. Paul Weller showed up with his guitar and amp. Can you describe how you set about putting it together?
Champagne Supernova was one of the more complex in as far as a lot of guitar overdubs from Noel. But it was put together the same way in that he laid down acoustics, and then Alan White drummed, then Bonehead put down Bonehead's rhythm guitars. I think I spent quite a while with Liam with the singing, because he hits some really high notes and he gets really soft. And I think it was pretty much the last lead vocal he recorded for the album. Yes, we spent quite a bit of time on that, getting his vocal really good. And Noel just kind of sat in the studio next to like a bunch of amplifiers with a bunch of guitars. And he just put overdub after overdub down. He did all these EBO parts. And it was amazing, really. You know, in about 3 or 4 hours, he'd put down all the guitar parts, save for Paul Weller's guitar solo, which happened when we were mixing in London, in Orinoco Studios. And Weller just turned up in the afternoon, like 3 in the afternoon, with his amp and his guitar, put a couple of takes down, him and Noel buggered off down the pub. It was all very easy.
Yeah. Well, just on that, I mean, did you ever have to find yourself acting as Peacemaker between the two Gallagher brothers?
Oh, myself, never, no.
Because there was a well-documented row, but it wasn't over vocal details. It was just one woke the other up and didn't really appreciate it.
Yeah, see, I kind of missed that. That was on the Friday night after our first week, and we'd been working really hard. And I went to bed, I was exhausted. But apparently, Liam brought back a bunch of people from the pub and was having a party, and that pissed Noel off because Noel was trying to sleep. So they had a bit of a row. I think it's been blown out of proportion, to be honest.
I think so.
And they did, I think their rows were quite dramatic. But I think people like Bonehead, who knew them very well, would keep them apart, so to speak.
Well, I think two brothers having a fight, that could go back to when they were 3 or 4 years old. People never know exactly what they could be rowing about. Stuff simmers underneath,
Yeah, exactly. But I think Bonehead, who's was an old friend of Liam's, Bonehead didn't mind getting involved and just trying to calm them down, because Bonehead's a strong Irishman himself, and kind of understands when people have a few too many drinks inside them. It can get a bit heated. But they took a week off from the studio. I carried on with bits of work. And they came back, gave each other a big hug, and carried on recording.
And, I mean, Noel was so hands-on. He was so in charge. I mean, didn't he play bass on most of the tracks, acknowledging that, the bass player is a little bit better maybe on stage in a live scenario?
I think he played bass on Wonderwall because he had a very specific idea for that. But I'm pretty sure Griggs played bass on most everything else. I'd be hard pushed to think of one that he didn't play on, apart from Wonderwall. There might have been times that on certain B-sides, Noel would just pick up the bass because it was just quicker, because no one had heard the song before.
Yeah, this is it. It was all in his head.
It was literally that case that no one had heard the song before. Yeah. Griggs had no ego about it, but he played on certainly 70-80% of the record.
Okay.
Yeah.
But with Liam, what I was going to say, with Liam, did you find it easy to work with him in terms of getting the most out of him? Because a lot of the time he probably didn't have much to do.
Liam, when he was singing like he was singing on Morning Glory, was such a pleasure to record. I mean, he'd be desperate to sing. So as soon as we had a backing track ready for him, he'd want to sing, and he'd go in pretty much and sing maybe 4 takes. And it was freaky because he'd never heard the songs completed before either. And Noel would sing through and give him the lyrics, and he'd sing through the song once to his brother. And Liam would go in and nail it, all the inflections, all the different bits of phrasing, which is the only time I've ever seen this in my life. And it's kind of freaky, their connection on that level, on a musical singing level. Maybe that's a brother Irish thing,
Could be.
But they were very connected, and Liam was singing extraordinarily well. So he was a pleasure to record. I'd record 4 passes. Then Noel would listen to the first take to make sure if there were any phrasing bits that were wrong, and there generally weren't. And then Noel would bugger off and leave me and Liam to it. We'd do a few more takes, and then I'd edit together the best bits of his takes. It was a pleasure.
It sounds like things just were, the stars had aligned and it was all happening. They're just on track 6 and 11, or the Swamp song. Mm-hmm. What's the story behind them being included?
I'm not quite sure why they went on the album. Noel had got that piece as a new live intro song that they'd go on to for that tour, I think, for the next year, which is an instrumental, basically. And then Weller came in again, did some harmonica on it, I think, when we were mixing. I think it was on one of the B-sides as in its complete form later. And I think it was Noel just throwing some sort of noise in there, really. It was never meant to be a track, and I know it pissed people off on jukeboxes when they picked it by mistake.
Oh, yeah, of course, yeah.
But it was just a sort of noisy sort of interlude, really.
It's funny you should say jukebox, because I was working in a student bar when this was released, and that was on heavy rotation. But you'd never tire of it. I mean, it was at the height, really, you know.
Yeah, it was strange. It kind of took over the nation, didn't it?
It really did. It really, really did.
We were kind of like, is it still selling? Who the fuck's still buying this?
Yeah, it was a phenomenon. When just one last one on a technical kind of thing. You know, when you would be hearing Noels trying out songs, and look, he's even spoken about it before. There's a little bit of borrowing goes on here and there. A bit of John Lennon's Imagine maybe in Don't Look Back in Anger. Bit of Gary Glitter for Hello. Do you kind of go, maybe we could change that a bit, or do you go, okay, that sounds good, let's put that down? I mean, what's your relationship with the songwriter when that kind of thing comes up?
Oh, with Noel Gallagher, my only input would be if I thought he was making a mistake with a structural arrangement.
Okay.
For example, he had a different arrangement of Wonderwall that was much more complicated. And that was my only input, I think, suggesting that he go back to his original, simpler version. But as far as, the Gary Glitter lift and things, we all had a laugh at that, really. It was quite funny.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. Hey, look, talent borrows and genius steals, something like that. I don't know what the...
Yeah, Noel was very upfront about where he was taking stuff from,
Absolutely.
And it worked for him,
I suppose it's possibly an obvious question, but I'm sure What's the Story Morning Glory ranks very highly on your list of favourite achievements, production-wise?
Oh, absolutely. I'm very proud of it. I'm very proud that we did it, really, and it was... And like I say, it was a really good time in my life, very happy time, and I wouldn't have missed it for the world. It was an extraordinarily easy project. I've done many more albums that were much more difficult technically and sort of just the whole thing. But everything just worked. Everybody wanted to be there, and everybody wanted it to be as good as they could do. It was a good time.
Everything coalesced nicely. Would you like to choose a song to finish us out?
I think we should play Champagne Supernova then, if that's all right.
Absolutely. After all the work that went into it, you want to get the most out of it. Owen Morris, producer of What's the Story Morning Glory. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, and thanks for taking the call.
Hey, nice one, Joe. Take care, man.
TXFM presents Album Anniversaries with Joe Donnelly.